Hello everyone, my name is Amit Jyoti. I am an assistant professor with the O.P. Jindal Global University. In this module, we will continue discussing the ICJ judgments. The first is the Nottebohm case, which deals with diplomatic protection. It is still a controversial issue if the area of diplomatic protection is covered under the international human rights law. Matters of diplomatic protection are based on the principle of comity on one hand and the protection of the rights of an individual by its state on the other hand. A state can only exercise the right of diplomatic protection over an individual if there exists real and effective tie between the two. Now, in the Nottebohm case between Liechtenstein and Guatemala, the judgment by ICJ was given on 6 April 1955. This case deals with the right of an individual to have a nationality. It is provided for under Article 15 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights that everyone has the right to nationality. Further, the declaration says, no one shall be deprived arbitrarily of his nationality, nor denied the right to change his nationality. Right to nationality is an important right, as from the right accrues the significant human rights of civil, political, social and economic nature. Nationality is closely connected to the concept of state, which has the obligation of securing rights for its nationals and necessary conditions for their enjoyment. Nottebohm case, as we would discuss, is relevant as it talks about the central role played by naturalization as a process of acquiring nationality and the concept of effective nationality as determining factors for established citizenship, a prerequisite for a state's ability to exert diplomatic protection on behalf of an individual. The Nottebohm case was filed in ICJ by Liechtenstein against Guatemala, claiming reparation for arresting, detaining, expelling and refusing to readmit Mr. Nottebohm, a citizen of Liechtenstein, and seizing and retaining his property without any compensation. The request for reparation had two parts. One, a claim for special and general damages owed to the government of Liechtenstein, and second, the restitution by Guatemala to Mr. Nottebohm of all his property that was seized and retained, along with damages for the deterioration of that property. Liechtenstein contended that it naturalized Mr. Nottebohm according to its national laws on October 20, 1939. And Mr. Nottebohm has exhausted all the remedies that were available under the Guatemala's municipal laws. Guatemala, on the other hand, contended that Liechtenstein's claims should be dismissed due to absence of any prior diplomatic relations and fraudulent obtainment of nationality by naturalization by Mr. Nottebohm. The court first considered whether nationality that was conferred on Mr. Nottebohm by Liechtenstein by means of naturalization could be validly invoked against Guatemala. Commenting on the importance of nationality, the International Court of Justice stated that nationality has its most immediate, its more far-reaching, and for most people, its only effects within the legal system of the state conferring it. Nationality serves above all to determine that the person upon whom it is conferred enjoys the rights and the person is bound by the obligations which the law of the state in question grants to or imposes on its national. This is implied in the wider concept that nationality is within the domestic jurisdiction of the state. The court held that while granting nationality is a state act governed by national laws, the question whether a state was entitled to exercise protection and whether third states were required to recognize the granting of nationality is a question under the international law. In cases where two states have conferred nationality on the same person, arbitrators in international arbitrations and courts of various countries have given effect to the nationality that is based on stronger factual ties. The court provided a list of factors that may be utilized in a situation to see whether the nationality is real and effective. The first point under this list is the habitual residence of the individual concerned. Second, the center of his interest. Third, his family ties. Fourth, his participation in public life. Fifth, attachment shown by him for a given country and inculcated in his children, and so on. Based on the legal bond between the state and the individual, the state will only exercise protective measures for the individual if there exists a genuine connection of existence, interest, and sentiments together with the existence of reciprocal rights and duties. While looking into the process which Mr. Nottebohm acquired nationality, the court questioned whether at the time of his naturalization he appeared to have been more closely linked by his tradition, his establishment, his interest, his activities, his family ties, or his intentions for the near future to Liechtenstein than any other state. The court took note of the following facts to conclude that Mr. Nottebohm's nationality of Liechtenstein lacked any real existence. The court stated that he was a German national from the time of his birth. He always retained his family and business connections with Germany, and there was nothing to indicate that his application for naturalization in Liechtenstein was motivated by any desire to disassociate himself from the government of his country. Further, he had been settled for 34 years in Guatemala, which was the center of his interest, his business activities, and until his removal as a result of war measures in 1943. For Liechtenstein, his actual connections with this country were extremely insubstantial, as there was no settled abode and no prolonged residence in that country at the time of his application for naturalization. These facts clearly establish the lack of genuineness in obtaining nationality of Liechtenstein and clearly establish fraudulent intentions of escaping the belligerent state. Therefore, Guatemala had no obligation to recognize a nationality granted in such circumstances, and Liechtenstein was not entitled to extend its protection to Nottebohm vis-a-vis Guatemala. Next, we shall discuss the case United States Diplomatic and Consular Staff in Tehran, which was between United States and Iran, and the order was given by court on 15 December 1979. This case was a result of a diplomatic crisis between Iran and the United States, whereby the US had agreed to shelter the Shah of Iran. In retaliation, a group of Iranian students attacked the US Embassy in Iran and took 52 American diplomats and citizens hostage for 444 days. It was alleged by the United States that no attempt was made by the government of Iran to rescue the persons being held hostage or to persuade the invaders and demonstrators to terminate their action. In fact, the United States alleged direct support of the Iranian government to the group. While the court primarily ruled on the inviolability of the diplomatic envoys, it also took note of the deteriorating situation that the consular staff could possibly be in and stated it is wrongfully to deprive human beings of their freedom and to subject them to physical constraint in conditions of hardship is itself manifestly incompatible with the principles of the Charter of the United Nations, as well as with the fundamental principles enunciated in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. The significance of this judgment is the recognition by the ICJ that binding state obligations do accrue from the Charter of the United Nations and the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. In fact, when the court did have an option to rule specifically on the points raised by the United States in its application, its going out of the way to take note of the individual conditions of the hostages is notable. The next case is Ahmadou Sadio Diallo case, which was between Republic of Guinea versus Democratic Republic of the Congo. The government of the Republic of Guinea initiated proceedings against the Democratic Republic of Congo, alleging that one of its national, Mr. Ahmadou, was unjustly imprisoned by the authorities of Congo after being resident in that state for 32 years. It was also alleged that Mr. Ahmadou was despoiled of his sizable investments, businesses, movable and immovable property, bank accounts, and ultimately expelled. Guinea stated that this expulsion came at a time when Mr. Ahmadou was pursuing recovery of substantial debts owed to his businesses by the state and by the oil companies in which the state is a shareholder. Now, this case is remarkable from a human rights perspective. You may ask why. Well, Guinea invoked provisions from the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights of the year 1966, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights 1948, Declaration of the Rights of Man and Citizens 1789, among others, and the responsibility of the ICJ was, in fact, to rule on such alleged violations only. Some of the allegations invoked by Guinea were from the ICCPR Article 9, Para 1, which talks about arbitrary arrest and detention, Article 9, Para 2, which talks about informing reasons of arrest and charges, Article 10 that speaks about persons deprived of their liberty to be treated with humanity, and Article 13, procedure for expulsion of an alien, were invoked. Detaining Mr. Ahmadou without trial or any form of charge was violative of UDHR. From the Declaration of the Rights of Man and Citizen 1789, Article 2 of Right to Property was invoked. Congo was in breach of preemptory norms of international human rights law. Based on the facts of the case, the ICJ held that Congo was in violation of Article 9, Para 1 and Para 2 and Article 13 of the ICCPR, among other provisions, and granted compensation in this matter. This shows that human rights claims, whether civil, political, economic, cultural, or social, fall in principle under the scrutiny of the ICJ. Now, in the next two advisory opinions, the ICJ has further discussed the status and treatment of the human rights rapporteurs under the Convention on the Privileges and Immunities of the United Nations of 1946. It is important to discuss the protections extended to the human rights rapporteurs as they play a predominant role at the grassroots level in implementing the objectives of the United Nations, like maintaining international peace and security, promoting respect for human rights and fundamental freedoms, and acting as a center for harmonizing the actions of nations. Without proper extending protection to the life and work and mission of these rapporteurs, achieving all these ends would not be very feasible. Let's look at applicability of Article 6, Section 22 of the Convention on the Privileges and Immunities of the United Nations. This advisory opinion was given by ICJ on 15 December 1989. The United Nations Economic and Social Council submitted a request to the ICJ seeking advisory opinion on status of special rapporteurs. When an issue arose between the United Nations and the government of Romania on the status of a UN rapporteur, Mr. Dumitru Mazilu, who was stationed in Romania in Subcommission on Prevention of Discrimination and Protection of Minorities, to prepare a report on the role of youth in the field of human rights. The Commission on Human Rights, which had formed this particular subcommission, requested the Secretary General of the UN to extend all assistance to Mr. Mazilu for the completion of the report. Mr. Mazilu was a member of the subcommission from March 13, 1984 to August 29, 1985. Then he was both a member and a rapporteur of the subcommission from August 29, 1985 to December 21, 1987. And finally, after no longer being a member of the subcommission, he had remained a special rapporteur. The issue arose before the ICJ over applicability of Article 6, Section 22 of the Convention on the Privileges and Immunities of the United Nations. Section 22 provides for the immunities available to the experts on missions for the United Nations. Before looking into the application of this section, in this given situation, the court interpreted the words experts on mission, which is undefined in the convention. The court said the experts on mission covers only experts performing missions for the organization and not the officers of the organization who are chosen for their technical expertise in a particular field. The section, however, did not provide any indication of the nature, duration, or place of these missions. Therefore, Section 22 is meant to extend protection to those who are not officials of the UN, but granted certain privileges and immunities to perform the tasks assigned under a mission. Looking at the status of the rapporteurs of the subcommission, the court held that they will be considered as experts on missions under Section 22 as their status was neither that of a representative of a member state nor that of a UN official. And since they performed independently for the subcommission functions contemplated in its remit. Therefore, the rapporteurs will enjoy the privileges and immunities necessary for the exercise of their functions and in particular for the establishment of any contacts which could be useful for the preparation, the drafting and the presentation of their reports to the subcommission. The court held that during all the time Mr. Mazilu was the expert on the mission covered under Section 22 and therefore entitled to all immunities and privileges. Facts that, like Mr. Mazilu fell seriously ill in May 1987 and his intellectual capacity was questioned by Romania, does not affect his status of an expert on the mission under Section 22. Now, difference relating to immunity from legal process of a special rapporteur of the Commission on Human Rights. This is another advisory opinion of the ICJ given on 29th April 1999. The United Nations Economic, Social and Council filed a request for advisory opinion before the ICJ on 5th August 1998. In this, they questioned the applicability of Article 6, Section 22 of the Convention on the Privileges and Immunity of the United Nations, specifically immunity of the special rapporteur from the legal process. In this case, Mr. Param Kumaraswamy, as special rapporteur of the Commission on Human Rights on the independence of judges and lawyers, gave an interview in his capacity as UN Special Rapporteur. A defamatory suit was then filed against him by two Malaysian companies who alleged that the said article contained defamatory words that had brought them into public scandal, odium and contempt. The UN Council requested the Malaysian authorities to exempt Mr. Kumaraswamy from the legal process as he is entitled to such an immunity under Section 22 of the Convention. But the request was dismissed by the concerned judge in this case. On failure of an out-of-court settlement between the Economic and Social Council and the Malaysian government, the request was made before the ICJ. Relying on the Mazilu case that we just discussed, the court held that since Mr. Kumaraswamy was a special rapporteur at that time, he will be entitled to the immunities and privileges under the convention. Now, the question before the court was whether the allegedly defamatory marks which was given by Mr. Kumaraswamy were made during the course of the performance of his mission, which will further entitle him to privileges under Section 22. For reaching the conclusion, the court took into consideration Article 6, Section 23 of the Convention, which provides that the privileges and immunities are granted to experts in the interests of the United Nations and not for the personal benefit of the individuals themselves. In the given case, the Secretary General or the legal counsel of the UN on his behalf had on numerous occasions informed the government of Malaysia that Mr. Kumaraswamy had spoken those words quoted in the article in international commercial litigation in his capacity as a special rapporteur of the Commission, and that consequently he was entitled to the immunity from every kind of legal process. Additionally, it was recognized by the UN that nowadays it is a common practice for the rapporteurs to interact with the media and share the details of their work. Therefore, when Mr. Kumaraswamy did this, he was performing his work as the UN Special Rapporteur. The Secretary General, being the administrative officer of the organization, has the primary responsibility to safeguard the interests of the organization. The court held that it would be up to him to assess whether the agents of the organization act within the scope of their functions, and if this is so, to protect these agents, including experts on mission, by asserting their immunity and then bring his findings to the knowledge of the national courts. Also, it was the obligation of the government of Malaysia under Article 105 of the Charter and the Convention to inform its courts of the position that was taken by the Secretary General, which it had failed at. Therefore, Mr. Coomaraswamy, as an expert on mission, was entitled to immunity from legal process, and the government of Malaysia was obligated to communicate this advisory opinion to the competent Malaysian courts to give effect to Malaysia's international obligations. Now, to conclude this and the previous two modules where we discussed the decisions of the ICJ, we would see that ICJ in its contentious and advisory jurisdiction has dealt with a variety of issues with which it has contributed in many ways in the development of international human rights law. The court has been able to progressively develop and interpret norms of the international law of human rights, hence contributing to an international legal order where human rights are given a prominent place. This development has also been possible through the initiatives of the United Nations in the form of UN Charter and other treaties which have been regularly referred by ICJ in its opinions. The court has at various places stated that abiding the human rights clauses in the UN Charter is the most important obligation of the states amongst others mentioned in the Charter. Through the judgments discussed, we may conclude that the court's contributions are, first, the principles and rules of international law concerning fundamental rights of human beings being engender obligations erga omnes. Second, the right of people to self-determination is a right which has an erga omnes character under international law. Third, international instruments such as the Vienna Convention on Consular Relations create individual rights for natural persons which are a part of international human rights law. Thank you for listening to this module.